Hi, everyone. This is Aaron Larson, Executive Editor of Power Magazine, and you are listening to the Power Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Greg Morris. He is the Product Application Specialist for Greases at Shell Americas. So, Greg, tell a little bit about yourself and what you do with Shell Americas.
So thank you, first of all, and then second of all, I've been in lubricants now since 1998. I officially started working exclusively in greases back in 2009. So that means that I've been doing this for way too long. But it's if you want to spend a lot of time on something, you better know your business. So that's what Shell expects out of me. So I concentrate on grease only. In the Americas, I joke and say that I have polar bears to penguins, so I cover all of the Americas. And so anything from Canada to the tip of Chile is my patch. So I work with a group inside of Shell, which is like myself, other grease product application specialists globally. We have two in the European market that covering there. We have one in India, two in China, and one in Australia. So we have kind of a network of folks, and we all work within the R&D team to bring high performance products to the customer and understand from their view what is it that the performance expectations are, and then when we go back into R&D work, making sure that we hit those marks and produce a product consistently that does that for the customer.
Well, I think it's really fascinating, and I'm sure there's probably dozens or maybe even hundreds of people that are working on improving these greases and making them more useful or more efficient and just improving the operability of them in equipment. What brought this to my attention was a press release that Shell put out about a grease that had just been certified in a couple of different areas, and supposedly it's the first dual certified grease available in the world. Can you talk a little bit about that? What goes into certifying these greases and what it means to customers when they see this type of documentation?
So from a certification perspective, if you go to OEM, they set a standard on performance or whatever that might be, but there's really nothing that was primarily customer driven or centered around the customer until you got something like GCLB, which has been around now for decades. And the HPM was the natural outgrowth of that, where we needed to update the performance expectations, because things are changing in the industry. Performance requirements are going up. Equipment is getting smaller. As equipment is downsized to reduce weight, you start to see smaller components, and smaller components have increased relative load. Increased relative load gives you higher temperatures, and so you're starting to tax the product more and more from an oxidative perspective. And so load carrying has to be higher, oxidative stability has to be higher. So all those things play back into the specification. The way the NLGI went about the HPM certification was, like I said, to be customer-centric. It was supposed to be difficult but achievable. So we didn't want to write a spec that nobody would meet and would cost millions of dollars to research and develop a new product. But what it was to ensure for the customer that they were getting a product that met their needs. And so we set a series of tests up that through an iterative process where we went through and said, what's important to the customer, what's important to the end user, and from that, looking back to what tests were available, standard tests were available, so we knew we could count on the reproducibility and of that test, from operator to operator and from sample to sample, and so we knew that we were getting good numbers, we were getting good consistent quality performance, all of those things. So we went back to, we set up the test, we did a straw man of that. Then we went out and we asked customers and said, does this meet your needs? We went into a small working groups and we did a lot of work around, what do you think the limit should be? And what are your expectations on performance? And so that caused a lot of internal debate. But we did settle on it fairly quickly. It was amazing how much alignment there was. and there were just a few things that were outside of that. But then we also added some new test techniques which are not standardized today, and we put them in there as we called it road testing in them. So we including them in as a report only, so people could see, how does this test apply to performance expectations. So there was a lot of forward look in there, and it was a lot of getting feedback from customers as opposed to just manufacturers or additive suppliers. And so there was a broad spectrum of people that were involved in coming up with it. But the idea behind it altogether is, as I said, difficult but achievable. And what we wanted to do is to make sure that from a customer perspective back, that when they pick it up and they see that HPM specification certification mark, that they know that the product will do what they intended to do, and that it's validated. It's not just based on what a marketer may say or what they might test one time. This is an auditable, routine quality inspection. So we have, you have the specification, you pass it, but beyond passing it, you're subjected to the audit process, and it's random. So everything that comes off the line should be consistent with the performance that you tested originally. And that's the expectation that the customer has, so we should expect that of ourselves as well.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a few abbreviations while you were talking that are probably very familiar to people in the grease industry, but may not be familiar to people in the power industry. So I'm going to go through a few of them. You said NLGI, which is basically the National Lubricating Grease Institute, which is a not-for-profit trade association primarily composed of companies who manufacture and market all types of lubricating greases. It was founded, back in the early 30s, but that's kind of the certifying body for all of these greases. You mentioned the GCLB. That was a certification that the Institute came out with that basically designated which greases were applicable for different types of uses. The GC stood for wheel-bearing lubricants, and the LB stood for chassis lubricants. And then you mentioned the HPM, which is the new certification, which stands for High Performance Multi-Use Greases. And specifically, the grease that got this dual certification is Shell Gaddis S3V220C2. And just to better understand what those letters refer to, the S3 is a Shell designation that indicates it's a mineral grease. The V shows that the grease is a lithium or lithium complex grease. The 220 indicates the ISO viscosity grade, which is something that people might be familiar with because it's the same type of system used with oils. And then the C indicates that additives were used in the formulation. And the 2 at the end, that's the NLGI grade for that particular grease. So again, that's Shell Gaddis S3V220C2. So I hope that's helpful to people listening. And with that said, do you find a lot of customers want to be involved in this process because maybe they can get their needs met more adequately being a part of the input to the certification? And how do they get involved? Do they contact you or do you contact them and just say, hey, we're doing this type of work. Are you interested in participating? Or how does that play out?
So it's a combination of those things. So within the NLGI, we have working groups that meet on a regular basis around specific topics. And the HPM was one of those working groups. So inside the working group, we had additive suppliers and we had manufacturers and we had people who were just marketers of grease. We had test equipment suppliers. So we had kind of a broad spectrum that was already in the membership of NLGI. But we actively sought end users to ask them what their expectation was. We did surveys. We also went out and we had them involved in those working groups. So we had their voice to make sure that we had their voice included in the conversation. And so it was a combination of things. From that perspective, how do we get those names? We all have industry contacts. We all have customers. My customers may not be the same as one of our competitors, but they have a different contact than I do. But if we poll enough of them and we reach out to them, we encourage them to be involved, we hear what their expectations are, or they actively participate, and that's what we want, is that kind of feedback and active participation.
Mm-hmm. The certification process, I'm kind of thinking it through in my mind. I assume there's quite a bit of work that goes into it, and I imagine all of your competitors are doing similar work behind the scenes trying to get their greases certified. So how difficult is it to actually get these certifications?
It's not easy. The consistency is probably the biggest challenge. You can make in a lab, you can manufacture a product that meets all the specifications. When you take that 35-pound or 400-pound batch and you turn that into a 15, 20, 40,000-pound batch, now is every batch that you make the same as what you created in the lab? And that's where the quality system is so important, and the consistency of manufacturing it, day in, day out, is so important, because that auditable piece is the part that really is tough, because at that point, a year from now, 6 months from now, a third party is going to go out and pull that product off the shelf. And it's not going to be a batch that hey, this is the batch. We need to be extra careful to make sure that this batch is just so. They're just going to take a random sample, and they're subjected to the same list of tests, all of them, not one, not two, not, a portion, all of the tests and the certification. And they have to pass all those tests. So that is the difficult part, is being consistent day in and day out in how you manufacture a product. It's a little bit easier when it comes to an oil, because it's a blended system. But in grease, you're actually carrying out a chemical reaction, and you have to be very specific on how you carry out the reaction. The method of manufacturing is as important as the molecules that go into the product, and that is where grease is different. It's not like oil, and so that's something that people generally don't understand, and so they don't understand the complexity involved, and that's why a specification like this is so important, and having the process around it is so important, because now a customer can look at that mark and say, okay, I have confidence that this is what they say it is, mm-hmm. and performance will meet my expectations.
And so how often are they testing these things, like pulling something off the shelf? And if it does fail, what are the consequences? Can they then strip you of the certification down the road sometime?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So annually, at minimum, there's going to be an annual test, an annual recertification or a check on what you're doing. And so that minimum once a year, and you have no idea when that will happen. You have to pass the test, and so pass all the tests. So there would be an opportunity for them to, if you miss a test and it's within the repeatability of the test, say the number is actually supposed to be 0.6 and you're 0.62 or something like that, you're slightly out. That's within the error bars basically, and so that's okay. But if it's supposed to be 0.6 and it's 0.8. okay, now you've got a real problem. So something that leads you back to they didn't make it correctly, or they didn't add something they were supposed to add, or they changed the formulation. So at that point, the NLGI can go back to them and say, cease and desist. You can't put that mark on your product rolling out the door anymore. And they'll pull it down from the website, and they won't be able to label that product with the certification mark. Mm. So that's the ultimate. That's like the death penalty, at that point. But as long as you're doing what you're supposed to do consistently, day in and day out, it's like an ISO certification. You say this is what we do, and we do it every day, and here's the proof that we do it every day. Quality manufacturers, that's not an issue for them. They do it all the time. Right. That's their expectation.
Yeah, I'm sure, you guys put in the work to make a quality product so that doesn't happen to you down the road. So I'm sure that's very important. From my own personal experience, I've worked at power stations where we're generating electricity, and of course we use a lot of grease. But what I've always experienced from my own perspective is that, we get a owner's manual and the grease is specified in there, and we just go out and buy the grease that they tell us to buy, and we use it for years and years and years and really never change anything. But you guys are doing research and development constantly and improving these greases and making new additives and formulations and making them better all the time. So what should an operations and maintenance manager do to ensure that they're using the best lubricant for their equipment?
There's a lot that's changing. If you look at some of the nameplates, or you look at some of the equipment, or that's been in plant in operation, that OEM had original guidance that they put out, and operational conditions have changed. In particular, you look at something, you're running it faster than you intended to run it, than the OEM originally intended it to run. That changes everything. Temperatures now are higher than they were before. Of course, that has an impact and changes everything. So it comes from both sides. There's innovation, from a technology perspective, in a manufacturing perspective, there's innovation. But on the other side, there's, the same time, people are pushing their equipment harder. They're doing more with it. They're producing more product than, with the same piece of equipment than they had in the past. And that places additional burden on the product. So the best way, to ensure that you're using the right product is to have a routine conversation with a lubricant supplier. We'll have a technical team and ask them a question. We have what we call local technical advisors, and they're folks who do lubrication day in and day out, and they can come in and do an assessment. They can help you get to the point where, are you using the right product? And, those conversations are, have to be open and honest and say, well, do we have a problem? Is there an issue, a piece of equipment that is giving you routine problems? You see it more and more often. And those conversations, or that feedback from the customer directly, will then guide you to, hey, we need to address this, and then you do the calculations, you do the analysis on what's different now than it was in the past, and you get to an understanding of, like, well, you really do need a different product, and this is the product that you should use. And so at that point, that's a conversation with the lubricant supplier and those technical folks associated with that supplier.
Can you talk a little bit about any improvements that have been made to lubricants since the time that you've been working in the industry, and obviously that's been many years now? What has improved, and how has it affected performance? Can you have any statistics or anything about reliability and how it might have improved performance over lifespans or anything like that?
Yeah, so if you go to somebody like, say, SKF or FAG, they have calculations. They say this bearing will last X number of revolutions or this many hours in operation if you use this product. And grease products, have always been the relubrication interval or the service interval on a greased bearing is always based on a high quality lithium complex mineral based product. And so that's what S3V220C is. It's that's the product that would be, okay, if you follow the guidance from the bearing OEM, this product, it matches up. But how do you get to a place where you have longer service intervals, you touch the equipment less often, or in case you've had change in conditions and you have higher temperatures now, different speeds, you can go to a synthetic. And that changes everything from an interval perspective. So essentially, you would double the interval. So if a mineral grade grease is relubricated at 1,500 hours, you may be able to stretch that out to 3,000. And so at that point, you using synthetics, you've gained something. You're gaining oxidative stability. A lot of times, there's mechanical stability that comes along with that, and you also have a thicker film at higher temperatures. So you're seeing increases or, enhancement of bearing life based on, L10 life of a bearing or L1 if it's, a piece of critical equipment. And you can see that hours increase based on the film thickness and the viscosity of the product that you have. So those are all benefits that you see out of going to synthetics. In synthetics, you see an efficiency gain. When you go from a mineral grade synthetic, over to a synthetic of the same viscosity grade, you can see 8, 10, 12% increase in efficiency. And where does that show up? It shows up in temperature in the bearing. So if you see the bearing and you go from a mineral grade to a synthetic, you can see a drop in temperature in the bearing, and nothing else has changed. You haven't changed the load, you haven't changed the speed, you haven't done anything else. What you see is the lubricant is having that much of an impact. And we spent a lot of years, looking at, can you just make a difference from an efficiency perspective based on the product that you choose? And the answer is unequivocally yes. You can see significant impacts on efficiency. It means something to you on the bottom line on how much money you spend on energy, but it also means, carbon intensity, how often you touch a piece of equipment, how often you have an opportunity to make a mistake and put the wrong product in. Reduce the opportunity for you to make a mistake has lots of benefits. We don't have as many people, working in the facility as we used to, dedicated to doing just lubrication. So you're doing more with fewer people. So if you can reduce the task that those folks have to do to maintain reliability, then you're helping yourself out as well. So there's lots of things that kind of all play together once you start to use a different product. You're using a cheaper product and using it more often. This is the way that it used to be. Use a little grease, and a whole lot of grease must be a whole lot better. And people are realizing that's not the way to go. They're looking for a better alternative. They're looking for a high quality product. And that's where HPM comes into play, where you can say, okay, with confidence, I do have a good product for the application. If I need to do something more, if I'm looking for something extra, if I'm looking for energy efficiency, if I'm looking for reduction in carbon intensity, I can do that by moving to a synthetic. And there's where you start to see things change.
This may be a stupid question, but what is a synthetic lubricant compared to a mineral-based lubricant? What's the difference? I would think the synthetic is still made from a petroleum-based base, is it not?
Not necessarily.
Oh.
So we have, Shell has what we call GTL technology, which is gas to liquid. We actually manufacture fuel and lubricating oils from natural gas. So, it's not a standard petroleum product. It's not an oil that comes out of the ground. So you actually break it down to the base molecules and you build what you want. And that's really what synthetic is about. You're building a purpose or a specific performance based on how long the carbon chain is. The molecule, the base elements are the same. Yes, it's carbon, hydrogen. Those are the base elements. But in the end, you can tailor it by manufacturing the exact molecule you're looking for. And that's where you're talking about synthetics. When you get mineral oil out of the ground, it's a mixture of lots of different molecules of different chain lengths. Some of them are saturated, some are unsaturated. And, you see, different performance. And, base oil from one place is not necessarily identical to the base oil you get from another place, even though they may be classified the same. So with synthetic, you have a lot more control over that. And because you don't have this variability, that you get in a natural oil, petroleum product, they act the same. You have an expected lifetime that's, you can expect it's going to last longer and it's going to last a predicted amount of time. Whereas in a mineral oil, you may see some parts that are failing sooner than others. And so that changes the performance of the product. And so you have to be more diligent about routine maintenance on those with those products.
Very interesting. All right. Well, I think you've exhausted my questions. Is there any other interesting information you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap this up?
Well, we talked a little bit about synthetics. In performance, expectations are changing. As we see, especially motor vehicles changing, we're seeing, electric vehicles as opposed to internal combustion. They're there are performance changes that will come, and they require us to change the greases and the lubricating products that go into those vehicles. So expect that, those things will change. And as they change, what products are the most important in auto manufacturing now are not going to be the most important products going forward. And that's a step change difference. So it's a very exciting time to be in lubricants, because it is innovation, and things are new, designs are changing, and everybody's trying to solve the problem, and they don't all solve for X the same way. So that brings new challenges to us, because it tells us, just because, say, GM or Ford solve it one way, that doesn't mean that somebody else is going to solve it exactly the same way. So that gives us opportunity to create new products and new challenges, and that's, it's exciting. I kind of nerd out a little bit, but I like a challenge.
Again, I've been talking with Greg Morris, Product Application Specialist for Greases at Shell Americas. So again, Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
You're welcome. Thank you.